John, Betty, Anna, and Mary were thrilled when they first moved into their new home, a beautiful old farmhouse that had been recently renovated. But soon after they moved in, strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut, even though no one was around to close them, and the family would hear footsteps in the hallway when they were all in bed. They tried to ignore the strange occurrences at first, but things only got worse. One night, Anna woke up to find a man standing at the foot of her bed. He was tall and thin, with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through her. She tried to scream, but no sound would come out of her mouth. When she looked closer, she realized that the man was covered in tattoos of strange symbols, and he was holding a black candle in his hand. As the days went by, the haunting grew more and more intense. The family would wake up to find strange symbols etched onto the walls, and they could hear chanting in the middle of the night. They knew they had to do something to stop the haunting, but they didn't know where to turn. As the haunting of their new home intensified, Betty began to feel a growing sense of unease. She knew that there was something more to the ghostly presence than they initially realized. One day, she decided to visit the local library and began to research the history of their house and the surrounding area. There, she discovered a book that detailed the story of Clayton Abner, a former resident of their house who had been accused of using children as sacrifices in his devil-worshipping rituals. Betty was horrified by what she read, and she knew that this was the source of the haunting in their home. Wanting to learn more about Clayton Abner and his crimes, Betty sought out the local townspeople and began to ask questions. At first, she was met with hesitation and fear. But eventually, she was able to convince one of the older residents to share what they knew about the infamous cult leader. Over the course of several days, Betty pieced together the full story of Clayton Abner and his twisted practices. She learned about the children who had gone missing under his watch and the community's eventual decision to take justice into their own hands and hang Abner for his crimes. Through her research, Betty gained a deeper understanding of the ghostly presence that had been haunting their home. She knew that they had to act fast to rid themselves of Clayton Abner's spirit once and for all. After learning about Clayton Abner's dark past and his devil-worshipping practices, Betty's suspicions grew that there might be a hidden room in the house where Abner conducted his rituals. She decided to search the house thoroughly, hoping to find any clues that might lead her to the secret room. One day, while searching the attic, Betty stumbled upon a loose floorboard that revealed a small trapdoor. She opened the trapdoor and found a hidden room that was filled with all sorts of devil-worshipping attributes. There were altars adorned with dark symbols, candles, and strange artifacts that Betty could barely comprehend. Betty knew that the room needed to be exorcised, but she didn't know how to go about it. As the haunting of the house intensified, Anna and Mary began to sense a presence in the house that was not quite human. At first, they thought it was just their imagination, but the feeling grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, while John and Betty were out, the girls were playing in their room when they suddenly began to talk to an imaginary friend. They said her name was Emily and that she was their new friend. However, something about the way they talked about Emily gave John and Betty chills. As the days went by, the girls continued to play with Emily, but they began to talk about her in increasingly disturbing ways. They would say that Emily was sad and scared, that she was trapped in the house and couldn't escape. They would talk about how she had died, and how she was now a ghost. One night, John and Betty decided to investigate further. They searched the house and found nothing, but as they entered the girls' room, they were met with an eerie silence. The girls were staring at a corner of the room, talking to something that John and Betty couldn't see. They approached the girls and tried to get their attention, but the girls were unresponsive. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and John and Betty saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was the ghost of one of Clayton Abner's victims, the little girl Emily, and she was a terrifying sight to behold. Her eyes were dark and sunken, her skin was pale and translucent, and her dress was stained with blood. She was a chilling reminder of the horrors that had taken place in the house. The ghost of Emily began to approach the family, her hands outstretched and her mouth open in a silent scream. The family was frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, the ghost vanished, and the room returned to its normal state. The family was left shaken and terrified, knowing that they were not alone in the house and that the ghost of Clayton Abner's victim was still trapped there, seeking revenge on those who had disturbed her resting place. As time went by, the haunting of the family only grew worse. The ghost of Clayton Abner seemed to be getting stronger and more aggressive with each passing day. It started with small things, objects moving by themselves, strange noises in the night, but soon it escalated to something far more sinister. One night, as John was getting ready for bed, he heard footsteps coming from the hallway. He assumed it was one of his daughters, but when he turned around, he saw a dark figure standing in front of him. It was Clayton Abner's ghost, and it was not a friendly sight. John tried to run, but the ghost followed him, its cold fingers grazing his neck as it whispered his name. After that, Betty began to experience strange occurrences. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find the ghost of Clayton Abner hovering over her, its eyes gleaming with the dark malevolence. The ghost would whisper to her, telling her to leave the house, to abandon her family and run away, or else she would face the same fate as him. The haunting then turned towards the children. Anna and Mary were constantly visited by the ghost of Emily, Clayton Abner's victim, and they would often talk to her as if she were real. However, the more they talked to Emily, the more the ghost of Clayton Abner seemed to be watching them, its dark presence lurking in the shadows. One day, while the family was having dinner, the room grew colder and colder, and the plates and glasses began to shake. Suddenly, the ghost of Clayton Abner materialized in front of them, his twisted features contorted with rage. He began to attack the family, throwing them across the room, levitating objects, and causing the entire house to shake. The family was left battered and bruised, with no idea how to protect themselves from the relentless ghost. As the haunting continued, it became clear that the family was in grave danger. Clayton Abner's ghost was determined to make them pay for disturbing his resting place, and it seemed that there was no way to stop him. The family was trapped in the haunted house, and they had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, as they were tormented by the vengeful spirit of Clayton Abner. Clayton Abner's ghost began to whisper dark and malevolent things to John. It would appear to him at night, its twisted features contorted with rage and hatred, and it would whisper to him to do unspeakable things. At first, the ghost would simply urge John to leave the house, to abandon his family and run away. But as time went by, the ghost's whispers grew more and more sinister. It began to tell John that the only way to end the haunting was to murder his own family, to sacrifice them in the same way that Clayton Abner had sacrificed his victims all those years ago. John tried to resist the ghost's urgings, but he found that he couldn't. The ghost had a hold on him, its dark presence invading his thoughts and driving him to madness. John began to have nightmares of killing his family, visions of them lying dead and lifeless at his feet. He would wake up screaming, his heart racing with fear and confusion. Despite his best efforts, John found himself slowly giving in to the ghost's whispers. Betty began to fear for the safety of her loved ones. She knew that something had to be done to put an end to the vengeful spirit of Clayton Abner, and she came to the conclusion that calling a priest might be the best course of action. Betty had grown up in a religious household, and she knew that priests were trained in the art of exorcism, the process of expelling evil spirits from a person or a location. She hoped that a priest would be able to help them, to rid their home of the malevolent presence that was haunting them. She found a priest in the nearby town and called him to come to their home. When the priest arrived, he immediately sensed the evil presence that had taken hold of the house. He blessed the home with holy water and began the exorcism ritual. As the priest recited the prayers and performed the rituals, the haunting grew worse. The ghost of Clayton Abner became more aggressive, throwing objects at the priest, and filling the room with a chilling presence. As the exorcism continued, the ghost of Clayton Abner became more and more powerful, possessing John once again. The priests struggled to free him, but ultimately failed. The ghost's rage intensified, let then throw the priest straight from the second floor to his death. Betty knew that they had to leave the house immediately, or they would all be killed. She managed to grab the children and flee in the car, but John stayed behind. The ghost of Clayton Abner had taken over his body completely, and he was beyond saving. Betty drove as far away as she could, tears streaming down her face as she realized that they would never be able to return to their home. They would forever carry the scars of their haunted past with them, haunted by the memories of what had happened. Years later, the family had moved on, but they could never forget what they had gone through. They still wondered what had become of John, whether he was still possessed by the vengeful spirit of Clayton Abner, or if he had succumbed to his own madness. After the terrifying experience with Clayton Abner's ghost, the police refused to enter the house and declared it off limits. The rumors of the haunted house spread throughout the community, and the house became known as a place of terror and death.